Hi, my name's Kay. Come on my morning walk with me. I'm really excited that you're here this morning. I'm also a little sad because I remember what it was like when I was desperately looking for answers, when I wondered if I was going to lose my mind or even lose my life because the stress and the hopelessness was so overwhelming. And eventually it led me to reach out for help of my own. But man, that was a hard time. The diseases of addiction and alcoholism, they call them family diseases because even though it impacts one person, it has such a profound effect on an entire family. And not just blood family, but even your friends. It's really challenging. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through my experience with you, believing that by listening to some of the experiences that I've had, it will help you in your journey through this horrible, horrible disease. And it is a disease. I think that was one of the hardest things that I had to come to terms with. See, alcoholism was a big part of my family, although I didn't really realize it because when I was growing up, because my mother's father had been such a notorious alcoholic. I mean, he had a job driving a truck and he would get drunk and forget where the truck was. My mother had 3 other sisters, and it was so bad that when they came home from school, the first one who came home, if their father was drunk, would put a white piece of paper in the window so the rest of them would know not to come into the apartment. They would meet down on the corner because it just wasn't safe to go into their home. That sounds like a really horrible childhood. But my mother, did one of 2 options. You either become part of that or you separate yourself as much as possible. So there was no alcohol allowed in my home when I was growing up. And yet the disease, it was still there. But I didn't have to confront any of that until my own son became a drug addict. And then suddenly, my world was just in a tailspin. It was a really, really challenging time. I was in denial for the longest time. He always needed money for different things, and I didn't want to believe what was really going on. And so I'd say, well, of course he can't be hungry. Well, of course he can't be homeless. I did the most outrageous things in order to provide for him and unfortunately to enable his disease. His disease of addiction became so much worse because of my enabling. He would not have been able to carry on the way he did for as long as he did without my help. I was a co-conspirator. That's exactly what I was. And you think, well, it's pretty obvious. You just say no, or, you get them to help, or there's treatment centers everywhere. That's not really that easy. The first thing you figure out when you start to put the pieces together for real, honestly, is that you can't change someone else. You may not want your spouse or your daughter or your son or your grandchild even to use alcohol or drugs, whatever their particular problem is. But the reality is that you can't stop them. And there's very little that you can actually do to help them. There's a lot that you can do that will totally, totally destroy them. We tell ourselves that we help the people we love because we love them. That's what I told myself about my son. He would have roommates, and he would get kicked out of wherever he was living, because drug addicts lie, okay? If you gave him money to pay the rent, it wouldn't go towards the rent, and so he was lying to me and lying to everybody else. And so every 3 or 4 months, I was moving him to a new apartment, putting down new security deposits, paying his portion of whatever the bills were. He always had a plan. And finally, I decided that it was exhausting to do this every 3 or 4 months. So my brilliant idea was to buy him his own house. Yeah, that was a real stroke of genius there. And that's what I did. Well, it wasn't until I was there rebuilding that house for the 3rd time. And this time, all of the appliances were gone. Even the sink in the bathroom was gone. Anything that could be removed from the house and sold for money was gone. So I was there. I had talked him into going into another treatment program, and he was supposed to go that morning. He asked me if he could go for a bike ride on a 10-speed bike that he had, just to get some fresh air, because he knew he was going to be in this recovery program for, anywhere from a week to 30 days. That's a long time to not be able to go outside or do anything. And I agreed to let him go. Well, he came back about 15 minutes later, higher than a kite. That's when I called crisis hotline. I know, crisis hotline, right? Sounds kind of crazy, but for me it was a crisis. I mean, an absolute, total, and complete crisis. All of the things that I had been through with this child, who is now 20. So I had already been through about 4 years of just insanity with this. Only I wasn't willing to admit it. And it's kind of like if someone asks you for directions. If you don't know where you're starting from, there's no way for you to get anywhere. Because if someone asked me for directions to San Francisco, how am I going to tell them how to get there if I don't know where they're leaving from? I can't. What's the same thing in life? If you don't accept where you are in this very moment, honestly accept it, acknowledge what a huge problem and threat this is, not just to your child or your spouse or your loved one or your friend, but to you. You have no way of getting anywhere else. There is no route that you can calculate. There is no plan that you can devise. There is absolutely nothing. So the first step, the most important step, is sitting down and being honest with yourself. That seems like a very simple thing to say. I will tell you, in reality, it is the most difficult thing that I have ever done. Because I had to acknowledge things about my child that I didn't want to be true. I had to acknowledge things about myself that weren't nice. Things that I had done that had hurt him. Things that I had done that had made the disease worse. My fears, my selfishness. I was doing all of the wrong things so that I could avoid hurting over this situation. And in the meantime, I was helping my son kill himself. It is a challenging thing to do, to be honest about yourself. You start off doing it just with yourself, really looking at it. Why am I doing this? Oh no, none of us want our sons to be hungry, our loved ones to be hungry or homeless or any of those things. That's a given. But besides that, What can we do to help? What is truly within our power? Is pretending that the money you give them for rent isn't going to go for drugs? No, it's really harrowing. I was at the house fixing it up for the third time. I was in a back bedroom working on a floor when I heard a pounding on the front door. My son came running to the back of the house, holding his finger over his lips and shh, be quiet, don't say anything, don't let anyone hear us. Well, of course, I wasn't going to stand for that, so I went to the front door and I opened the door, and there was a young man there that asked me if my son was home. And I said, what is it that you need to speak to him about? And he said, well, he has something in mind that I need, and so I just really need to talk to him. So I looked at him and I said, you're a dealer, aren't you? And he was kind of shocked and wide-eyed and didn't really know what to say. And he said, hanging his head halfway, I'm not a bad person. To which I replied, you know, I bet when you were growing up, this wasn't the plan. There must have been some really bad things that happened that this is how you live. And he shook his head, yes, that was true. But then I went on to explain to him how this was a really bad business plan, because there were a lot of dealers, there were a lot of addicts, and his market was a group of people that didn't really have any resources. They had to steal, manipulate, cajole, whatever they had to do in order to be able to purchase anything from him. So there was going to be a time with each of these people that they were either going to fail at that or they were going to die, and then he lost his market altogether. And he looked at me like I was insane talking about business plans to him. So I decided to just bring it down to brass tacks for him. So I explained that I had been providing all of my son's income and that I wasn't going to do that anymore. So if the plan was to provide him with drugs, and if he didn't pay up, to beat him or whatever, well, you might as well beat him to start, because he wasn't getting any more money from me for that. I don't think he knew how to deal with someone honestly confronting him. But that was the first true moment for me when I could admit what was going on. It was the first time that I did the really right thing in regard to the situation, which was to draw a line and say, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to hurt my child anymore. I'd like to say that's the last time I did any enabling, but it wasn't. I had a long way to go before I had a full understanding of the situation, before I had a full understanding of what it's like to be an addict. And I don't have a complete understanding to this day, because I'm not an addict. I don't have that disease. I have the other disease. The addict is addicted to drugs or alcohol. I'm addicted to the addict. But realizing where I am, where I'm starting from, well, that's the first and most important part of this. I'm going to finish my walk for the morning, but I'll be back tomorrow to talk to you about the next part of my journey in this. Try to find whatever peace you can in this day, and be kind to yourself.